When I come to work every day and I know that what I'm doing is a gift from God, and I don't mean to sound hokey and Bible thumping, and please don't think that I'm trying to be that way, but it is a gift. What we do matters. What we say to people matters. The things we report on matter. And while other stations do it, and they do it well, and I give them the respect for what they do, we add that faith-based perspective to it that's missing in so many parts of the world. And I think we should embrace that, and I think we should be so proud of it. So, again, network with each other, talk to people about what we do, and you know what? Let's spread the word. Catholic press is cool. I don't care what anybody says. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I'm sorry, I dipped into Brooklyn a little bit. I apologize. I tend to go in and out. But I would love right now to introduce just another wonderful panel. It actually was called The Future of Catholic Media, but it was changed to The Evolution of Catholic Media, which I do think is so appropriate because we've made so much progress, and I think people are starting to notice that. So I am humbled, and it is with privilege that I introduce the panel. Elizabeth Scalia, Father Thomas Rosica, Doug Keck, and Msgr. Kieran Harrington. Please, a warm round of applause.
So, good afternoon. Today, as we begin our discussion today, we're having a discussion about Catholic media and really the place of the Catholic media. And so the first question I'm going to ask Doug is, Doug, do you think that Catholic media is a ghetto? Is this the place where the church should belong in a specific genre that's kind of limited to religious broadcasting? Or is it a place that, do we have a place in the broader secular world?
Well, I think we do.
Orange mic.
Can you hear me?
Here, why don't you take mine? Right there.
Started.
There you go.
Is that better? Okay. Yeah, I think to answer your question, I guess one of the ways I'd answer it, and this would be one of the things, as I guess the representative from EWTN, who is greatly honored to have been invited and be on a panel with my good friend, Father Tom. We got to know each other during World Youth Day way back when. And just to give the idea to some degree, and maybe to give some hope, not only in addition to the wonderful work of Salt+Light and what DeSales Media and Net and the great channels inside the United States, to just give you an idea that at this point in time, EWTN is in 270 million TV households worldwide. EWTN is 15 different television networks, multiple radio networks in English, Spanish, and in German. We have 93 million homes in the U.S., 10.7 million in Spanish. Many people don't know we have a complete Spanish network here in the United States, also available in high definition, also available in South America and in Spain. As far as the Internet's concerned, EWTN's website features 30 million visitors annually to EWTN.com. On the Internet, we get 2.67 million media hits every month. Streaming, right now we're at about 200,000 hours of streaming content delivered every month. For our EWTN news outreach, online video views more than 4 million per month. Our register is up over EWTN's National Catholic Register, which we own. And now on the website is up 30% over previous years in distribution and also in views. You saw earlier the Catholic News Agency. People might be familiar with that. EWTN also owns the Catholic News Agency. It is now free access to Catholic news in 5 languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, German, and Italian, featuring 30 reporters and editors located in 8 countries across the globe. Así Prensa, which many people might be familiar with on the Spanish side, is the largest, most visited web provider of Catholic news in Spanish and Portuguese. That's also our company. We have over 21 million online video views in the first 4 months of 2016. Our mobile application, some people have been talking about that. It's a wonderful thing. We have one as well. 450,000 downloads of EWTN's mobile app and counting. EWTN's platform and positioning is to be everywhere. Just to make people aware, we're available on Google TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Roku TV, and we have multiple YouTube channels. Our YouTube, my stats from a month ago were 785,500 fans. On Facebook, right now we're actually up over 800,000. So it's grown to about 20 in about less than a month. In addition, we have 687,000 fans on Spanish and 609,000 additional fans on Aussie Prensa, and 135,000 followers on Twitter, 169,000 on Aussie Prensa.
So Doug, we get the point, right?
And
That there's a huge universe here of people who are watching EWTN.
And one other thing I wanted to say was just the idea, and another thing which I think we wanted to reach out to, because a lot of things is reaching young people, is Church Pop. It's a website that EWTN owns that is very, very popular. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, to answer your question in a long way around, no, we're not in a ghetto at all. At the same time, I came out of television 20 years ago. I was in the startup of AMC Bravo and a lot of other channels. I worked with Charles Dolan, who started HBO, the whole idea of the magazine format, the whole idea of the multi-channel universe we're in today with thousands of channels. The reality is there's nothing wrong with having complementary channels. When I want to watch sports, I don't need to go to a Catholic sports channel. I can watch ESPN. Okay? So I think what we can look at is that, and I think as we're seeing here, and what some of the people, I think, in some of the wonderful talks that I heard about radio and also the internet and Father's Talk as well, is the idea that people are tasting and bringing things in from different ways. So I guess our goal is really to put out the full plate in all different ways that we can. And that's, in a sense, what I was trying to say we're trying to do. Certainly what DeSales is trying to do is say, listen, there's not one way to do it. People are different. I wasn't even an altar boy. I always kid and say I went to Holy Trinity High School on Long Island. I was voted least likely to work at EWTN. Trust me. Okay? I mean, I worked on the Playboy Channel one time in my dim, distant past. So I have some varied experiences. So I think what's important for us to realize is that the great insight I think that the Catholic Church has is both and. It's always both and. And one of the great insights I got one time, at least for me personally, was I said to myself, if there's only one real true spirituality, why isn't there only one religious order? Why are there bazillions? Why are there Jesuits? Why are there different? And it's because the Catholic Church encompasses the whole truth, but it can be delivered in a multiplicity of ways and formats and styles to whatever you happen to be. And what's great about it is we don't have to put those in juxtaposition to one another to say one is better than the other, because they're all complementary.
Together. Father Tom, you're the English-speaking media attaché for the Holy See. So when you are looking at various media outlets, you look at secular media, ABC, NBC here in the United States, New York Times or Newsday, versus Catholic media. Which is of greater value, do you think, or which is of higher importance for you and your work and the kind of concentration of your time and attention?
Certainly the association with the Vatican, especially the past 3 years with the papal transition and following, but also in the years before that when I was first appointed to the Synod in 2008, has given me an opportunity to realize that what the world expects from us is not to create ghettos, but places of penetration. For me, our measure of success is, as much as I appreciate the statistics, the only statistic I'll throw out is I'm a bazillion. That means we're lots of them, okay? But we're St. Basil, not bazillion. People often say, God, you must be there's a lot of members in your community. I said, I wish. For us, it's the level of penetration. So while we are committed to the Catholic community, we also have to relate with the public community. We're very good at condemning, at chastising all of the secular media. The New York Times did this, and this group did that. But my association with them now, and with the big networks, is they're looking to us for good stories of hope. And we have to be working with them. So I share my week, for example. I just looked at last week. Yes, I'm at Salt+Light Television. We're the Catholic network for Canada, broadcasting in English, French, Italian, Mandarin, and Cantonese. But I also have all kinds of things to do with Australian broadcasting, with BBC, with South Africa, with all of the networks in the United States, and with the Canadian networks. That means they're looking to us, and they're oftentimes using our footage. For me, that's a measure of success. Our goal is to be reaching out, and Francis has been very clear about this. Go to the peripheries. it's very easy for us to stay within the Catholic household and to talk about Catholic issues, which are all very important. But is that really new evangelization? Is that really this new field? Is that really the parable of the sower? And when, I'm a scripture person, so the parable of the sower did not go out with a very calculated plan of where he wanted the seeds to go. The key with sowing is generosity and liberality of the sowing. Throw it out and get it out there. So for us at Salt+Light, we appreciate immensely the networks that have gone before us, EWTN, KTO in Paris, with whom we work very closely, but also I'm very interested in connecting with the secular networks.
Elizabeth, you're a blogger, although you're so new media. However, you're also the author of a book, right? A new book, Little Sins Mean a Lot. I'm curious, two questions for you. One, the importance of, when we think about the blogosphere as new media, it's really not new media anymore, right? It's that sort of change. The question is you started out as a blogger, the anchoress, and now you curated a specific area on a Catholic, on a larger blogosphere, Pathos. Now you've moved into a new venture, which is kind of more politically associated. What is your sense, one, of the location of where people find information? Are they looking in specific Catholic areas? That's the first question. And secondly, the value of new media, the internet, the digital age, versus traditional media, writing books.
You're giving me the hard question. All right. First of all, before I answer that, I just have to address something that maybe Doug didn't get a chance to. You're asking about Catholic ghetto. There has to be a Catholic ghetto. There's no other way around it. If you look at a report that the USCCB commissioned a couple of years ago, it found that only 3% of all of the Catholics in the United States even think about going online to look for Catholic media, that they even think about looking for Catholic media in their lives. So we begin in the ghetto. It exists. Can't deny that. The point of new media, especially because you go where the sheep are feeding, new media has reached a point where it's moved from a ghetto into these awful echo chambers, where it's almost like we're in a conduit and we've got all these fibers, and some of them are very, very right-wing Catholics, and some are left-wing Catholics, and some are, mommy Catholics and what have you, and they've all kind of gone into their own little echo chambers.
Religious fractures that you're sort of, which are reminiscent of political fracturing.
Absolutely. It reflects what's going on in the rest of the world. And so the job of all of us, I think, but particularly in new media, is to slowly but surely kind of get those people to come out and see that there's more going on in their world. Because most Catholics go online, they're not looking for media, they're looking for Kim Kardashian. And that's a sad truth. Mm-hmm. And I probably said her name wrong because I don't. But
maybe Lady Gaga
because I'm in the
instead.
ghetto. Yeah, because I'm in the ghetto myself. But the point is, we're really trying. Where I'm at right now at Aleteia, we're really not political at all. We were perceived very much so as a kind of conservative news publication. Last September, we changed direction, and we're really much more interested in telling the Catholic story now, from a storyteller's perspective, from a lifestyle perspective, from a perspective of we're writing not just for Catholics, but for all Christians. And that's the first way to start branching out of the ghetto. So we're writing stories, for example, about sports, and Daniel Murphy, who's not a Catholic, but he has a faith, so we talk about his faith perspective. Or we're writing stories about the Benedict option, which is something that's being bandied about a lot on the internet, but we're talking about it from an Orthodox perspective and a Catholic perspective, and we're bringing that into it. So in that way, we begin to break out of the ghetto. We begin to enlarge the field itself, the field of interest, and then we take the opportunity to say, what's happening economically with the big bank breaks up in 2008, the economic downturn in 2008. How could subsidiarity, address that? And then it's like, well, wait a second. Now we're talking about Catholic principles and concepts that are affecting my life on a secular level. Let me pay attention to that. So there's a way to break out of that ghetto, but it's going to be arduous and it's going to take time.
Doug, when you take a look, you run a massive, and you kind of laid out for us, and we saw the entire family of companies that EWTN is really at the hub of. That suggests like huge infrastructure, right? Your television station, which you're programming for 24 hours a day, certainly satellites, which are satellites and natural, huge infrastructure, which requires enormous investment. Do you fear that in the world of today, this digital age where there's sort of a flattening out, that those resources which you have to put into an infrastructure is kind of, that there's a challenge as opposed to getting that to into sort of programming or production or in that area which might be a little flatter today? In other words, a kid with an iPhone today can do a video, pop it on the internet, and have 800,000 people looking at it, whereas what we do in traditional television is a lot more time-consuming and expensive.
And we certainly hope if there's anybody here who can do that, send it to our Cool to Be Catholic website. That would be wonderful. We'd like to feature your videos on EWTN anytime we could. So check out our website on that. There's some brochures about that as well. Thank you for that introduction. No, I think for all the years, I mean, I'm sure everywhere you work in media, you work every place else. You know, people are trying to figure out where things are going. The reality is, for the most part, very few people actually know where things are going. I know the people who started HBO, who made the name HBO, they thought it was a horrible name, and they wanted to change it the next day. But that became the standard name for it. So the reality is, in so many things that get started, people aren't sure where they're going. They think it's going over here and it's going over there. And that's where Divine Providence and Mother Angelica came in so much in our lives at EWTN, which is, that's what she relied on. And, you know, we used to say, Mother, when you're gone, will another sister step in? How will this work? She said, well, you know, if God wants it to go on, it will. If he doesn't, it won't. And so for us, what we do, quite honestly, is continue to try and do the best we can, following the guidance we believe we've been given, and to provide the Catholic truth as laid out by the magisterial teachings of the Catholic Church, be true to that, and we believe that the truth attracts, and that people are drawn to the truth, especially in an age of today, and that people are drawn to it, and they seem to be willing to support our work. And as we move forward, we found that opportunities present itself. We have a channel in Ukraine that's run in Ukraine. We're going to be launching something in Sweden because benefactors there came forward. So again, and I know that Father Tom has experienced this as well, you start down a path and then somebody shows up, some new opportunity. So I think for us, our biggest thing is to try to do the best we can to be prudent stewards of our people's money. We always say, I don't want to go to heaven, hopefully I'll be there, but I don't want to stand there and explain to some woman what I did with her $25, that I misused it. So we take that very, very seriously. And so we're trying to do the best we can to make our technology available, be smart about how we do things, get it out there, and try to incorporate as much of the new technology and to get the help of young people and out there to reach the millennials, because I can't talk to my daughter, so maybe you can, you know, but and she's not watching TV either. So.
Father Tom, you know, Pope Francis, I think one of the things that strikes so many of us is the authenticity of Pope Francis, right? He's very, you know, when he speaks about the smell of sheep, everyone gets that, right? We priests understand what he's saying. He speaks in a way, his very language. You watch him in Brazil as a car is getting overrun by people, and they're rocking him back and forth, and you know this is a guy who has the smell of the sheep, right?
You say prayers, too.
Yeah. So I think about this level of authenticity, and this is what resonates with people. I also think that this is what was the case with Mother Angelica. You know, Mother Angelica, she was kind of a plain-spoken woman. That got her into trouble, right? And we all remember the time where she took on Cardinal Mahoney, and then there was the cram down to make her apologize. And as she went on to apologize, she just really couldn't get it out. And people loved her for it. At one time in the church, that was tough. But under Pope Francis, there's a certain level of liberation. I'm wondering, about being able to express one's opinion and to forcefully disagree, and for there to actually be a dialogue taking place. Do you think that that's an accurate assessment of where we are at in the church today? In other words, is when you do your job, Mother Angelica spoke about taking risks, and she did take risks. communications can be perilous for communicators, because in the church, sometimes if you take a risk, you can be challenged. What would you say about the state of things in the life of the church today?
Each pontificate, each era has its blessings and its burdens, and we have many, many graces right now in this particular pontificate, not to say they were not present before. The mood has changed, the playing field has changed. And so I mentioned this morning in my address, the insistence on dialogue, on charity in our discussions. That's a whole new thing, really. It's been there, but Francis is insisting upon that. For example, the very spirit of the past two synods of bishops, that's a big change. It's encouraging people to talk, and that synods become what they are. And Catholic communications has to become the same thing, too. Respectful dialogue. It's interesting because a younger generation is very aware of that. And no matter what one does in our business, you get constant phone calls or messages or death threats or whatever in the name of from very good faithful Catholics. But the Pope is against the death penalty, so that's a very important thing. But what's happened now is when one loves the church and one respects the church, and I have 34 people on staff, there are 35 of us with myself, we're all together on this, and we have a wide spectrum of beliefs. I've got a couple that they frequent the extraordinary form, and a couple that are this, and a couple are that, but we're Catholic. And the word Catholic means there's room for everybody. The other thing I must say,
That's James Joyce, right? Here comes everybody.
I admired Mother Angelica for this, and Bishop DiMarcio referred to it this morning. What she pulled off is because the American bishops were unable to do that. They had grand and glorious ideas of having this internal network. They expended a ridiculous amount of money, and it failed. For those who criticize EWTN or any network for what they did, at least they did something. That's the important thing. The other thing from Mother Angelica, and it's very obvious with Doug being the president and Michael Warsaw, both Doug and Michael are colleagues and friends. These are lay people. Our network is fundamentally lay. I'm the only priest on the staff, and they're all lay people. And the key to the success of these Catholic media enterprises, especially like ourselves, is committed lay people and young adults. It's their generation. Pope Francis met with our staff in October. 5 of us worked at the synod, inside the synod. And he met with our team one morning. He came and said, I want to talk to them. And he came and said, the future of Catholic broadcasting is when you place it in the hands of young adults. It is not something, and a lot of people don't understand this in the church, especially bishops. After the world, I'll relate a story. I'll tell a tale out of school here, but this is a perfect example. After the World Youth Day in Germany, 2 years afterwards, because I had done the World Youth Day and I survived and I remained a believer after it, because it's not all a given when the priests who run the World Youth Day, some drop dead or some leave the church or whatever. I survived, and the German Bishops' Conference called me and said, we want to send a team of bishops to Canada to see whether or not we should start a Catholic television network like Salt+Light. So they sent a team of 8 bishops, Doppeldoktor, 2 doctorates, doctor this, doctor that, theologians, way above people's heads. And they have a meeting they had 4 meetings with our staff. And the Archbishop of Stuttgart and the Archbishop of this and the Bishop of this, they came with these sheets. I said, what on earth are you looking for? So they're having a big meeting with the staff, and they said, how do the bishops in Canada control the network? I said, this is not about control. So the Archbishop of Stuttgart, who spoke a little English, asked my staff, he said, how often does Father Rosica intervene to correct your theological errors? So everybody's looking at each other. And how often does the Cardinal of Toronto step in to stop what you're doing? I said, no. So Mary Rose, a lovely Filipino woman on my staff, raises her hand and she says, well, Father Rosica did intervene once 2 years ago. He called me to his office and told me that the first apparition in Lourdes was 1854, not 1858, or something like that. That's the only time. So the bishop said, how can this be? These are lay people. I said, these are intelligent lay people. I said, they know what they're doing, okay? So when you have a starting point, we're going to control this. The bishops will control it. Why would you want to put this burden on an Episcopal conference? They don't have money, nor can they get their act together, okay? Give this to competent people and create very good rapport with bishops. The Pope has asked me several times, how is it that all the bishops in Canada are so supportive of Salt+Light? They all claim it as their network. I said, Holy Father, they don't have to pay anything for it. They give us blessings and they write nice letters. And he said, bravo, okay? So I think the starting point is all of that. This is not about control. It's at the service of the church. And the goal is to find competent lay men and women, and hopefully lots of young. Like when I look at this is the first media conference that doesn't double as the ARP, whatever it's called, the Association of Lovely Elderly People who are living their lives vicariously through these media entities. But when I see these beautiful young women and handsome young men that are here, intelligent, this is a great, and I told Bishop DiMarzio, you got something on your hands here, cherish it. You know, and you are a perfect example of that.
Elizabeth, maybe you can speak for a moment about the same question. Do you feel that you can address questions of the scandal in the life of the church? We had a panel on the movie Spotlight, and you think about how reticent the church was. Here's a movie that was clearly on its way to becoming an Academy Award film, and there was great resonance to speak about the movie, to address the issue. Do you find that Catholic bloggers were also kind of taking that league of kind of not being sure what exactly to say? Was it going to be hitting a third rail?
I can't really speak for bloggers anymore because I don't do much blogging myself. From my perspective, Catholic bloggers all have their own kind of agenda. And, you know, either they would go after something like that as terribly anti-Catholic, or they would try to be conciliatory toward it. I know for what we did at Aleteia, when Spotlight came out, we linked to reviews that were positive and some that were negative and tried to give a fair representation. And then a friend of mine who is a professor at Boston College wrote to me and said, you know, there's a character defamation in the movie. Can I write about it? Because I know this guy and I know that this is incorrect, what they've shown. And I said, yeah, if you know this, go ahead and write it. And we had no problem publishing that, even though it was really kind of going against the tide of a very popular movie at the time. And I like to think that the fact that we brought that out into the open had something to do with a recent finding, a recent admission by the producers of Spotlight that, yeah, we kind of screwed up on this, and we're, you know, settling with this guy, James Dunn, because we have defamed him. So I think it was really kind of an effective moment where we got to be Catholic media interacting with secular media on kind of a different level rather than simply reacting to it, but saying, hey, what about this?
Doug, do you ever wonder when you're looking at your programming, and because this is something that I often think about myself, and when we speak about it in terms of programming, like how am I going to cover bad news? And especially something happens, parishes close, maybe a bishop gets removed. How do we cover this sort of thing? So there's a challenge where we can become like Soviet-style TV. Mm-hmm. This is what you were sort of addressing. How do you address that at EWTN? Because again, this is a network that's a global network. It's not like you're accountable to a particular bishop. How do you kind of address those kinds of questions?
Well, I think what we have with that, obviously, it's probably heightened because of, as you saw, for those EWTN News Nightly, our nightly news show, which is anchored right out of Washington, right in the heart of Washington, as well as Raymond Arroyo's show, The World Over. And of course, we're dealing with a lot more of those things directly in a professional news because we have presence at the White House full-time, et cetera, as well as from the Vatican on a daily basis. So we don't have the ability to kind of ignore these things. I think what we try to do is say, listen, we're not going to exploit it either way and try and make hay out of the situation. Our issue is to shine light on it in the way to say, yes, this occurred, and these are the facts, okay? Not this blurb or this headline, but there may be other information you need to understand into this particular case that may not be so self-evident. I guess that's where the whole idea of getting context and putting context to the story is to say, we're not denying that these things happen, but you need to understand them by bringing somebody on who maybe can understand the whole phobophilia, pedophilia issue-related thing, or the percentages as it relates to other situations. Not to deny it, but to put it into context so that we look at our role many times with the EWTN News Nightly is to be able to say to somebody, you can watch Fox or CNN or whatever you want to watch, but if you can get some context from us, that's when you're engaging that. This shouldn't be the only thing you're watching. Hopefully what you're doing is you're getting something from our channels so that you can go out and live your Catholic life and know what you believe and can stand up for it because you've been reinforced by the Catholic community, family, the support where you can learn and say, I knew that that was true. I didn't quite understand why. Now I can go and stand up. And I think the Holy Father, from John Paul II through Benedict and Francis, sometimes it wasn't easy for us sometimes to have the Pope always apologizing to everybody. But at the end of the day, that's true humility. Because, yeah, we apologize. We make mistakes. But in doing that doesn't mean we're the only people who ever make mistakes. But it does free us from having to spend our time defending ourselves rather than trying to figure out how do we go forward from here? What steps do we take so that these things don't happen anymore? What do we do so we can better explain to our people and out there they understand all the nuances of the story that may not be so evident when it just gets splashed across some headline, or as we found out recently, on Facebook, where the curators were maybe playing fast and loose with what stories they pushed and which stories they didn't push.
Father Rosica, how do you deal with this question of like Soviet-style TV at Salt and Light?
We don't deal with Soviet TV. Basic rules of thumb, denial is not a river in Egypt, okay? So when we spend our time denying all this stuff, it serves no purpose whatsoever. Secondly, I remember when I was growing up, the first kind of adult film, by adult film, I don't mean, the first kind of R film, remember when Love Story came out?
Can I challenge you for a second on this? I'm going to just challenge you for 1 second.
Go ahead.
A couple of weeks ago, the Holy See suspended an accounting audit investigation that was being done by a major American firm, international firm.
I was involved, yeah.
It took 6 days for the Holy See press office to respond to that story.
Yes.
So the question then becomes, like, if that happens in dioceses, the news articles are really bad.
Yeah.
Now, the Holy Father gets a lot of great publicity, and so, and maybe it doesn't affect us as much over here, but there is still a tendency to clamp down on releasing information and being as transparent as we can about what's actually taking place.
I don't think it's any secret that to bring about a change at the level of the Vatican, at the Holy See, you're trying to turn around a ship, and there's all kinds of forces at work. And so at times, I'll squawk and make all the noise I can and push for an immediate response. But sometimes that's not forthcoming because a lot of forces at work there. We're getting there, but we got a long way to go. And my office, I don't sit on Via Conciliazione except when I'm working in Rome. I sit in Toronto, and I try my best to push things. A perfect example was the folly of the Kim Davis story in September, when people in Rome thought that this would blow over. And I had arrived in Rome September the 30th, and the first assignment I had was, deal with this. There's this woman who was at the nunciature. And I said, Mamma mia, this is a mess. And it took 4 days and went into the synod, when the synod was starting. And people didn't realize the urgency of that. So I hope my presence, and hopefully now Greg Burke's presence in Rome, will help change some of that. But it's not going to happen overnight. This is why I tell people, pray for Francis, because the problem is not with Francis. Let me get back to what I said before about denial. When I was little, I was watching a Love Story. And I remember we had to leave the room a couple times for certain scenes. But the one scene I was there for, remember that stupid, mushy scene when you hear that line at the end, love is never having to say you're sorry, and the music and everything else. And I remember being really upset with that because I grew up in an Italian household where you spend your life saying you're sorry. The whole lot, you make mistakes. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. You just say you're sorry. So I remember telling my mother how stupid that Ryan O'Neal is in saying that line there in the movie. Well, it's the same for the church. We've got to say we're sorry about things. John Paul apologized 99 times. Francis has apologized. But apologies are not the political apologies people want to appease people. To say we made a mistake, and we've covered all of these crises. The sex abuse crisis. Salt and Light was born, and we were born in the middle of a huge ecclesial mess and the difficulties of the pontificate of Benedict. I must say, when Benedict resigned, I breathed a sigh of relief for this, that nobody believed us anymore for what we were saying in the church. The epitome of Benedict's pontificate, that wonderful man who was so poorly served, was the story of the butler. Did the butler do it? Did the butler do it? You know, nobody believed it anymore. So that's why I consider Francis's arrival, the mood changed. You know, there's something that happened. So we have to talk about those issues, present them factually. But what we've done at Salt and Light is each crisis that's come about, we then, on other platforms, we invite in a psychologist to talk about ephebophilia, pedophilia, and what this means. We invite in people, we have panels, and these have been extremely effective. So you present the news, but then you use other opportunities to teach about that. And while some people rant and rave that we shouldn't be talking about this, we shouldn't raise this, don't ever mention that word, God forbid that you mention homosexuality on your network, I do say, give me a break. We're living in the real world.
We've got to wrap up, so I want to get just some closing thoughts. If you were to think about what is your greatest hope and what is your greatest fear for Catholic media in the future, Elizabeth Scalia?
Yeah, you still want to give me the hard ones. All right. First of all, one of the greatest hopes I have for it actually touches on something that Father Thomas was just talking about, and you with your challenge to him. If the Vatican is slow, if the Holy See Press Office seems slow or has to be slow sometimes to wrap themselves around a story and get in front of it, I really think, and my hope is that they will begin to rely a little bit more on bloggers to help get out in front of a story when they really can't. For example, do you remember when Light of the World, Salt of the Earth, Pope Benedict's book came out and he talked about provisional opportunities for using condoms, and secular media went crazy and said, oh, the Pope says it's okay to use condoms. And that was one time where Catholic bloggers went out there and said, no, stop the story in its tracks, and they really did. I literally saw that turnaround within hours in the newsrooms where they were correcting themselves because the bloggers just went crazy on it. And I think sometimes the Holy See misses an opportunity to get out there with reliable people in new media, not, cranks and people with axes to grind, but people who they can trust to really use them as a resource to help get in front of a story before the Holy See can actually get something prepared, so that there's something going on to help turn things around or get in front of it.
From the level of the Holy See, I have the English language media list for the English language media heads right now. It started off during the transition with 60 people, it's now 1,600. And of those 1,600, I've really pushed at the Holy See that when we have these encyclicals or pastoral letters or whatever coming out, we cannot expect the journalists to turn out something solid if you release it that morning or the night before. A perfect example was with Laudato Si when it came out, and all the crazy leaks and different versions of it. And I took the liberty and then informed Father Lombardi, who is a great man. He would have been here today if he had time. He said, choose carefully a selected group of people and give it to them in advance under embargo. I've done that now consistently. Not one of them has broken the embargo. But the result of that is excellent stories that come out in all these different publications. So Rome has to understand that this must become a strategy. You cannot release L'Amoris Laetitia, 265 pages. I was in Rome that week, and I said, this must go out on Wednesday night. You cannot give it to people, because I spent 8 hours reading it and taking notes for the press conference, okay? Number one. My wish, my hope for Catholic media, to answer your question, is we can clone, although it's not allowed, Bishop DiMarzio and you and other people, because this has to exist in other places. The priorities of Catholic media are not even across the countries. For some dioceses, they would see no reason for this, and the excuse is always, we don't have finances. But what's happening here is theological, it's pastoral, it's communications, it's first evangelization, and it's new evangelization. And until we put those priorities in order, we're going to have a very uneven system. The USCCB has got to do something similar to this. Firing people doesn't help with situations, but working together. Catholic News Service is an excellent news service in the English-speaking world. And so what we're seeing now is reactions rather than proactions, proactivity in the area of media. And I have great hope in also putting young people in key positions.
Doug, I'm going to give you the last word. Your hope, why don't you start with your fear and then with your hope?
Well, I would say that most of the time in my experience in dealing with Catholic media, My biggest fear is for people to be feeling inferior to their secular compadres and forcing them to sometimes go along with things that they shouldn't be, or not realize that sticking to your guns and your beliefs is what you're called to do. And so, because I've seen that sometimes where people who get around that can start to feel like, well, I want to fit in with the team and get along and we're all buddies here. And I think that's a mistake. I think if you're called to work in Catholic media, that's your vocation. You should live it out and live it out as best you can with all the talents you have. There's wonderful, talented people here and other places who are committing themselves, I think even more so today, who are seen by opportunities, whether it's DeSales or Salt+Light. If we can build it, they will come. Show people there's opportunities to use their creativity to the betterment of the church and to get our message out. We have the truth. What's our problem? I mean, our problem is we just can't seem to be able to get it out. And the other problem, I think, is that sometimes we've got to convince people they should care. Because it seems to be we have, I think, wonderful programming, great product. A lot of people are just not interested. And we haven't figured out how to convince them that this has an impact on their lives in a positive way. So my fear is that we do that. The upside, I think, is the future. I think we've read the book. We know how it turns out. So we know we're going to win in the end. We may not be there to see it. I think the technology is here. The most educated people in the United States are Catholics. If we can just harness that and focus that, and the more people see what really matters in life is their family and their faith, and the things that the society cherishes are ephemeral, disappear. And the faster we see that, I think the more hope we'll have for people, you know, living good lives and trying to be good people, because that's, at the end of the day, what it's all about, being a good person.
Father Tom Rosica is the media attaché for the Holy See and the CEO of Salt+Light. Thank you very much. Elizabeth Scalia is the curator, or what's the exact title of Aleteia?
Editor-in-Chief.
Editor-in-Chief of Aleteia. And Doug Keck is the COO of EWTN, the Eternal Word Television Network. Let's give them all a round of applause.